right, so we're getting towards the end here. We're in our stem mixing stage of the track. As I said a few minutes ago here in the last video, I bounced everything down to audio. So usually what I will do when I'm getting towards the end of my track is I literally stem everything out. I'm giving headroom too. You guys will notice my stems are pretty quiet if you check the master. I'm not really peaking over too far over the master channel. General rule of thumb, which I kind of went a little higher, but general rule of thumb is -6, -4, sometimes -8 dB of headroom to the master channel before you go into this mixing stage. Also, side note, you guys will notice I have my chords all bounced out separately, which I've muted, or I have the chord bus, which is all together. So I have the option to mix the chords individually or the entire chord group, which gives you a little more freedom. Same thing with the top leads here, as opposed to having everything separate. So it's good to have that flexibility. Okay, so when I'm mixing, the first thing I always do in my mixing session, I go down to my mixer console here, I grab all the stems and I bring them way down. So the volume here in the video is going to be a little bit lower. So the cool thing is, when you put it lower, if you guys are unfamiliar with this, I've mixed records for many years now, and I've always mixed very low. There's a few reasons why I do that. A lot of the instruments, the effects processing that I use while mixing, all react better at a lower volume, so they're not peaking and clipping and distorting. They're sounding fuller in their natural state. If you go too hot with the levels while you're mixing, you're going to ruin everything in the entire sound of what that effects plugin you're using is supposed to do. So keep in mind to really mix low. And the second thing you'll start noticing when you have your volume lower, you'll start noticing things that stick out like a sore thumb. For example, in this track, the snares are way too loud. So let's first address that in the mixing problem. I also think they both have too much 200 hertz going on. Now when I'm mixing, I'm also EQing. I'm doing any post compression. My in mix before this, I'll usually do a lot of that. I'll get it to the kind of the fullest I can get it with sound design and all the stuff we've done. But in the mix stem session we're in now, I will do some post EQing, any compression needing, any add-ons that are needed to the production to really make it kind of sound as full as possible before we go to the mastering. So I'm now taking my bass stems and I'm looking at them versus my chords. So the way I mix is I mix my bass, I mix my drums down like we have. Those are pretty well done. I then mix upward to kick bass, bass chords, chords top lead, and if I have a vocal and so on. I'll keep working that way. So right now I'm checking how my bass is going to be working with the kick drum. So let's bring down to the kick here. I think those could be rolled off a touch tighter, so I am going to group those over to a new bus here in the stem mix, and we'll call this bass. And I'm going to open up Q2 here. As I said, I do a lot of post EQing inside my stem mix session. So let's take a look. Okay, so now I go up to my chord bus, my chord group, and I start mixing around that. So these should be meshing together. I'm now going to look at the Q2 on there. They shouldn't be masking each other too much, meaning canceling each other's sound out. They should be kind of wrapping around each other and working within the different frequency. Therefore, the chords will be rolled off a little further than the bass line. And I'm going to honestly make these chords actually tighter too. Let's go down to mid side, throw on the side function here. So notice as I'm mixing up, as I said a minute ago, I'm going in that sequence of chord, kick, bass, chord. I'm soloing on and off here to check whether it's making a difference, whether I'm missing my kick when one comes on. I'm still clearly hearing that 4/4 thud that you really need in the mix sound, so make sure that's definitely full. Okay, so let's keep going here. So now let's solo chords up to top lead. And I think the top leads could honestly be a little more brighter and compressed also. So let's open up the cue and just take a look at this real quick and make sure we're rolling everything off properly. So since we pushed our chords inward, we can get away with mixing these leads a touch more outside, just a little more subtle to this, a little bit wider. See how we're hearing separation now from chord to lead? That's really what you want to do when you're mixing down. So let's now zoom out here and start putting the bass back in as we've been doing and take a look at that. So the bass should now match up. Let's now put that on here with the chords. Go down here. See the bass. Let's now go back down to the bass again. I want to double check on our sign here. And the key thing is when mixing too is to check on your stereo, your overall stereo of each stem individually. Bass mainly being mono, chords for me, I love putting them a little more center, closer to mono rather than stereo, and then giving room to my vocal and my leads more in the stereo field. Okay, I think my kick, if I now solo that again with my bass, I think overall my kick and my song could use more low end. Just open up the EQ here on the kick. Not too much, and I want to give a touch on the transient up top. So let's look at these two again. This bass is more, this one here as I solo, is more for a saw noise sound. As you guys can hear, this one has a little more of an acid style sound to it. And I'm going to compress this group a little bit. I'm going to throw that through an SSL. I'll use the Waves one, since a lot of us have that. And I'll put that right through the SSL comp. And I think that actually could use a touch more sidechain than we initially did in our in mix, just to make it duck a little more. Let's actually take a look on the graph here. everything's starting to take its shape as far as the mixing. You've got your bass underneath, you've got your chords middle and a little bit louder, and then we worked up to our top leads being just a touch louder here. If you look at the mixing changes, it's very subtle here. You guys can see very, very subtle changes in the mixer, because overall mixing is going to come down to a dB or so, sometimes half a dB, sometimes 2 dB. It really all depends. We have our reverse top lead. Let's turn that up. And let's compress these snares a little bit more. I'm going to do a multi-band compression. I'll link both of them up and put them to a bus. And I think they're just standing out a bit too much. So let's throw a multi-band on here. FabFilter I usually use. All right, so they're starting to feel a little more balanced. I'm liking the mix so far here. The percussions feel good. Like I said, I've worked up from that kick bass and so on. That's usually how I mix my sessions here. But initially, before I get to my mastering stage here in a moment, I want to feel pretty good about my mix. I shouldn't have to go to my master session and smash a bunch of stuff on there to hide the mistakes I made in my mix down. Really be happy with the stage we're at here before we go to our mastering. That's one thing to always keep in mind is don't rely on your master channel to make up for your mistakes in your mix down and your production. So with that being said, let's step over to the last video and let's master this track.